Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors, experts in the biggest questions in tech. This is Making Revenue Tick. So welcome to Making Revenue Tick. We have actually, Joseph and I, just finished the episode, but we thought we'd spend 60 seconds just telling you about what you're going to hear when you enjoy the full pod. So Joseph, what's in store for people when they listen to this episode?
We covered a lot of stuff, Richard, but I think, said simply, assumptions that are left unchecked can kill a business and are a crack or a debt that always comes due for that business in the long run, especially early stage SaaS. There are so many things that you can assume are correct, like product market fit, or that a certain leader is great, or that your CAC payback is healthy, or your growth rate or your close rate, or whatever it may be. There are so many things that, or the phase of growth that you're in. There are so many things that we assume are accurate that eventually come back to bite us if we don't constantly check those assumptions. And so we talk about some of the ways to solution and observe and check in on those assumptions consistently, put expiration dates on them. So that way you are not dealing with an assumption that comes back to bite you in the future, stalls your growth, or even kills your company.
Absolutely. We're also going to talk about how to hire entrepreneurs. We're going to talk about building a challenge network. We're going to talk about your greatest strength being your greatest weakness. And we're going to talk about the systems and stories of how other businesses have managed to avoid the stagnation of assumption to achieve their growth. Hello and welcome to Making Revenue Tick. I'm delighted to be joined by one of my favorite people that I met on the internet, Joseph Jenkins. Joseph, how are you doing?
The internet's a big place. I am honored, and it's great to see you, Richard.
I love meeting strangers off the internet, and we definitely have to meet in real life soon, but it's one of those things. We were connected through probably our best ever referral partner of all time. Not that she's incentivized in any way, but Meredith Chandler.
She's
said
wonderful.
that we should probably speak. So again, shout out to Meredith. And we had that conversation and just instantly connected. I think it's because we both love early stage businesses.
We do. There's a shared trauma. Is that what they say? Create bond. Early stage is a wonderfully torturous but fun time. So yeah, you've learned a lot, and you clearly have a very strong depth of knowledge. So yeah,
well, working on it, right? It's this ever moving beast, isn't it? And I think what we said would be a crime for us not to do a podcast together. And then we were talking about, well, what are the topics? And you've made a very successful career out of helping earlier stage businesses. And I know that's not been always just a smooth ride, because it never is at that stage, but you've managed to, through the way that you think and your intelligence, spot patterns, spot things that are consistent, that both stop early stage businesses from reaching their potential in terms of growth, but also some of the best things that you've seen that you would encourage other businesses to repeat. And when you start working with them, that's the playbook that you go to. Could I just ask, why is this topic of early stage businesses and helping them to scale one that's close to your home?
Great question. You know, I think it actually goes back to my family history. My grandpa started a furniture store that burned down in the 70s, and he had to start from scratch.
Wow.
And I have a picture at my father's house. I actually requested a copy of it this last week, where he rebuilt, and he built a very successful business. Not a huge company, but a local furniture store that has done well. And there's something about rebuilding and the resiliency of American entrepreneurs or UK or whatever, right? Just cut that one. There's something about the resiliency of entrepreneurs rebuilding when there's failure that is really the mark of a great entrepreneur. And my grandpa was an inspiration in that way. And I've seen a lot of early stage founders that I've been privileged to work with show the same type of resiliency or show the same resilience. And it's inspiring. It's way different than playing defense in a Fortune 50 publicly traded company that's just going for market share. There's a scrappiness, there's a resourcefulness, there's a creativity that exists there that just doesn't seem to exist in late stage companies. So it's addicting and it's fun.
I love that. Do you know what? We've hired a few people recently into first sales leader roles, the kind of entrepreneurial first sales leader, who specifically wanted to move back into earlier stage businesses because they had been part of that growth phase of a business before, opening offices in different parts of the world, creating structures, building and hiring and scaling teams. And it got to a maintenance stage, particularly after later funding rounds. And they just had lost that kind of buzz and they wanted to get it back. So I think it's it's incredibly complicated and difficult, and you risk the house burning down most days, but it's quite addictive because the challenges for the right sort of mindset are actually much more fun than that maintenance stage. I'm not saying in any way that those further later stage businesses, the maintenance is easy and there's opportunities for growth, but early stage is a bit more different and unique.
I agree. I think there's also and I know you felt this with your experience, Richard, but there's something different about having your fingerprints on something that you helped start. So even if you're scaling and maintaining something, it's different when it's your baby or something that you helped start. And you know the story of how you got there to joining, 50 years after it's been founded. And sitting in your department, hitting your KPIs and reporting on your OKRs every quarter. It's just, there's a different heartbeat and a different connection that exists for those early stage employees. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about who is going to be the most relevant people for this topic. So we're talking about early stage businesses. Let's first define what we mean. What sort of stage of phase of growth will this topic most resonate with?
Yeah, I think it's probably best to clarify at first that this is primarily through a B2B SaaS lens. And so the stages that we're going to be describing are relative to that world. Early stage founders, first time or even second time sales leaders, head of sales, first founding AE that's trying to grow into head of sales, VP of sales, CRO, name your inflated title of that first person that's trying to help grow that sales team. Usually between 1 to 20 sellers. And then I would say, pre-seed all the way to Series B is really that growth sweet spot. And the mistakes that they make or the assumptions that they make rather that end up being a cancer or a sickness to the business in the long run or a crack in the foundation that costs them immensely in the future. The goal today is to talk about how to prevent those cracks and to build the foundation in a way that can scale so that you're not facing a lot of debts later on.
Love it. So we're going to talk about avoiding cracks. We're going to talk about the assumptions that unwittingly hurt you. And I think that when we were talking and you showed me your incredibly detailed and well thought through Notion document that you've used to house the playbook that you bring into businesses, there's a level of systems thinking there and this architecture piece, which I think that a lot of founders, when maybe they're technical founders, they've produced this incredible product. They're going out into the world to turn this idea into a thing. And they maybe have had a few years of history of building this business up to a certain point where they want to go and bring in external help to go and get the business to scale. And in that journey, which is, like you say, probably 100 times when their house was really close to burning down and all these iterations of how they've pivoted their business to go and find market fit, get some revenue, get some more customers, and then have the business in a position, the beautiful position where they're like, we need to bring in some external help to help us to go and scale the business. But you keep mentioning assumptions and the things that they might just overlook, potentially blind spots they've got that unwittingly hurt them. Let's talk about why. So why is this topic of the assumptions that prevent businesses from scaling something that you love to talk about?
I think it's probably the same reason that a therapist who specializes in depression. We tend to be passionate about the things that we've seen be a challenge in our lives, but then we're resilient from or that we grow from. And so I've seen a lot of assumptions harm some of the businesses that I've worked with or that my friends have worked with or those that I've advised for. And so, assumptions are hidden things in our minds that we believe to be true, but are actually imagined data, which is interesting to think about, right? An imagined state that our product is in PMF stage and that it's permanent, that it's never going away, or that your first seller who happened to be your nephew is the greatest seller you've ever met, right? There's so many of those assumptions that are there, but it's, I think labeling assumptions and clearly identifying them early is something I wish I would have done in a lot of my teams. Yeah. And the great leaders that I've worked with also have worked hard to self-identify because they can come back to bite you later on. And we've got some stories and examples I can share as we go through. Assumptions, tricky.
100%. Let's do that. And as you're saying that, I'm like already excited. I know that in a very short amount of time, maybe a few weeks time, I'm going to be running around the streets of Bournemouth, Dorset in England, listening back to this podcast and just smiling because this topic of giving like real world examples and stories around how we can help early stage businesses to be successful and stop all the nightmares happening is what I want to spend my time listening to. I love listening to celebrity. I love listening to entrepreneur. That's what most podcasts do. This is the real stuff. So let's get into it. So first of all, why does it happen? So why do assumptions exist, particularly at this stage of a business's life cycle?
They exist because, for one, they have to. You have to have some assumptions. You hope that customers, assumptions are what get entrepreneurs past the ideation stage to like actually selling a product, right? We believe that there is this, and maybe there's some data. There's probably some data from some research out there or some website they found or even customer interviews. But there's still an assumption that the solution they're building is going to fit. So I think SaaS entrepreneurs naturally are good at making somewhat qualified assumptions in what they're doing. They're often technically backed though. And as a technically backed worker or technical founders often have not dabbled in the go-to-market sales side of the world. And so they tend to hire the person with great charisma that was referred to them by someone with a big logo that they really respect and hope that that person's going to work out. I know you know a lot about those traps that they fall into. But yeah, they make assumptions because they have to. They're moving too fast. They're doing 14 jobs. They're trying to fundraise to keep the company alive while somehow getting their dog fed at night in between coding. And it's a forced function. But the more resources you bring and the further you get down in your journey, the more you can realize, okay, we've been making an assumption that, this is true, or that this is something we don't have to worry about. And the more you can go gut check and validate or put expiration dates on assumptions or when you're going to recheck in with those assumptions, the better off your business will be. Because I've seen many that have carried on far too long in some businesses and heard of the same. So it's hard coded into who founders are, I think.
I love that. It's like, have you heard that saying that your greatest strength is your greatest weakness?
So
it's true, right?
Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell's book, right? David versus Goliath, he talks about that.
Amazing. It's so true, right? Like I remember, I'm just such a optimistic person. I see the good in people, and that's helped me to spot incredible people and then select them for leadership training programs, and then they become incredible leaders in career and selected great salespeople. And it's why I'm probably quite a good recruiter, because I see the potential in people. But early on, I got burned a lot of times because I only see the good. So that healthy cynicism that you need to be a good sales leader, I don't have much of that. I've had to learn that skill. And a lot of founders, it is a superpower, the ability to see what's possible, to take a assumption and then actually go and put a load of belief into it, get other people rallied around that thing, get people to spend money on it. The belief you have to have, the congruency and certainty that you have to project to get other people to buy into this idea that this assumption might become a really powerful thing. Getting investors, all that stuff means that there is probably such a high ability for this person to make assumptions that other people believe in that people would not want to challenge them too much, because actually the founder has this special magic thing that other people who are more pessimistic could never come up with in the first place. But at some stage, the creaks are going to appear, the cracks are going to appear, and people are going to fall foul of those assumptions not becoming true. And I guess it's about blind spots. I guess it's about, you've got all these strengths, but one of the reasons why you bring in other people into your business, like you, is because you have a different skill set, a different mindset. You see the world in a different way, which helps people to stop falling foul of their own strengths. How fair would that be to say?
You're completely accurate. In fact, you sparked I wasn't planning on sharing this, but it's an important principle. I recently read a book. It's called Team of Rivals. It's the story about Abraham Lincoln choosing his cabinet when he won the presidency. And if you recall Lincoln's presidency in the United States, this was like peak Civil War. The country is divided more than it's ever been. Literally, there's war happening. And Lincoln chose to put people on his cabinet that not only opposed him in the political race world, but also had drastically different ideas, were from drastically different backgrounds. He really valued diversity of thought. I found that that's a hack for founders or for sales leaders in the early days, is to make sure you hire people that have the guts to tell you when they're wrong. They're not afraid of the power dynamic. And so an interview question that I like to use is, as a very simple question for a seller is, I give you a cold call script and it's not seeming to work for you. How long do you wait to tell me that it's broken? And genius sellers will say, well, first of all, I wouldn't tell you it's broken. And it kind of gives you a signal of how they communicate bad news, right? Instead of labeling it as broken or suboptimal. but they also say, well, and you see their quantifiable ability to determine like, well, how many calls would it be? How many weeks would it be? How many meetings would it be before I say something, and how would I say it? And then you have them role play that feedback. Anyhow, that side quest there. But I think if you can find those people, those entrepreneurial people that have the guts to tell you when you have something in your teeth or when the product isn't working, they're some of your most valuable people. They're the ones that raise their hand in all hands and say, and they ask the hard question that no one else has the guts to ask. That professional skeptic, as I like to call them, are some of your most valuable hires in the extra work they do outside of their role, is checking you on those assumptions.
Yeah.
Founders who repress those personalities, because those personalities left unchecked can be a little too aggressive, right? And not have enough optimism. But if you can leverage and double click when those signals are raised from those types of people, it's really useful. At a company, they had a seller who they assumed was phenomenal, had closed all their deals, was their sole seller for years. They'd hired some people and fired some people. This person had always stuck around. Turned out that the seller had a really good network of friends that they knew in that local area. And there was a short leash of how they could milk that network for revenue. New sellers came in and said, hey, just so you know, like, I think there might be some things going on here that are not sustainable for the business. Like, we can't go do what he does because we don't have this network. And sure enough, that rep ran out of pipeline and had some things that would come from referrals later on, but the Rolodex was short-lived. And without a rep who had the guts, not to tell on their teammate, but to say, hey, that not the teammate, but the process of how that person sourced their deals, it's not repeatable, boss. Like, we got to find a new way, was really helpful. We could get ahead of it. We could start to architect a different channel or a different motion that helped that rep to see success and other reps to see success in the future that was repeatable. So anyway, that persona to gut check is an important person to have on the team.
Yeah, I love it. My old CEO used to say, none of us is smarter than all of us.
Ooh, I love that.
And I'm a massive fan of building a challenge network. Like, I've got some people on my WhatsApp, good friends of mine, who I know if I reach out to them and ask them for feedback, I'm going to get the absolute, like, brutal truth of what they think. And I also know some people who would just say, yeah, love it. You know, like my mum, you know, Mum, what do you think of this website? Beautiful, Richard. Really well done. So proud of you. We don't want that in startup world. It's very slow and painful. So let's talk about some of the patterns that you've seen around the assumptions that prevent businesses from scaling up to that kind of Series B, 5 million ARR type range.
Yeah. So there's several that I've seen consistently across many companies. And this is from interviews, advisory work, networking, my own experience. So I'll keep the stories anonymous for that purpose. But...
In fact, let's do that first, Joseph, because I've jumped a step and I think it'll be really valuable. There must be people listening to this going, well, obviously they connect really well and Joseph sounds amazing. I already love him. But tell us a bit about who you are and the type of businesses that you've made a career out of helping.
Well, referencing your internet culture earlier, I am not a cousin of Leroy Jenkins, for those that know the meme. Or the YouTube video. But yeah, I come from early stage software. So I was at PepsiCo for the first part of my career, loved it. I was fortunate to have 4 roles in 3 years, but felt mummified in red tape, like I think most entrepreneurs do, to use your phrase, Richard. And I found out there were a lot of my friends making great money, traveling less, and enjoying a more meritocracy in SaaS startups. And so got lucky enough to join a company called Podium. They were Series A at 12 million. I was there until they were at 1,500 employees and 200 million 4 years later. Was really, truly a rocket ship time, and had several roles there in leadership, and yeah, loved it. So did that early stage from Series A to really Series D as a director level at my end of my time there. Then joined a couple other early stage startups, one in HR tech, another in the AI space, and then advisory things in between. Have learned a ton about different early stage startups and what can go wrong. There's 1,000 ways to die and only a few to survive. And have seen some of those survival tactics that have worked quite well.
I love that. I love that also you started in big world, you know, like PepsiCo, because I think that if people have seen those massive businesses, there's still some magic in those businesses, and they've created structures that mean that you can actually have, I'm not saying that that's the staff situation in PepsiCo, but in larger businesses, there's a lot of fat. And there's a lot of mediocrity, but the business is still incredibly profitable, which early stage businesses really struggle with. So there's a bunch of stuff they do really, really well that creates systems and repeatability and a customer experience and a brand that mean that if you can take some of that magic and then bring it into earlier stage businesses, then you've got a really good chance of knowing what good looks like and how you can get there, and not having to think that everything has to be perfect all the time, because it just doesn't exist. Also, I love the fact that you've done this A to D, because if we're talking about like kind of up to B, when I'm speaking to founders and they're saying that, Richard, could you help us to find a world-class entrepreneurial sales leader who has done, and they always say about the stage of revenue growth that I've done. So let's maybe pull out some of those stories as part of this this conversation. But I originally asked you, what are those patterns of assumptions that you see? So let's get back to that.
You bet. So one of the assumptions that I see a lot is they assume that their sellers are good, or the opposite, they assume their sellers are bad. So founders don't know, because they haven't seen sales teams, what good looks like. And so they'll try to get references, from leaders or referrals, or, sales leaders they might know at other companies. But the truth is, until you have someone who's objectively seen a breadth of sellers, ideally in multiple companies, I've had over 100 employees that I've hired in my time as a sales leader. And I would say that breadth is good enough, but there are many that have more and a ton that have less. And they'll run it off a 15-person team they ran at Toast. And that there's one lens of success and what that could look like. And that team at Toast was field sales, not inside sales, or not in HR tech, right? And so capturing a third-party advisor's view, and they're not traditionally super expensive, whether it's via retainer or stock or equity. There's a lot of ways you can find good advisors out there. They can give you a good gut check on how good your talent is. So that's one. Because I've seen it with nephews and friends and referrals from big logos that don't work out, as you and I both know.
Let's pick on that, because I'm really interested. So this whole like phrasing that you used around whether they're good or bad, my opinion on this is that it's a huge amount about environment and fit. So you could take a really great salesperson and put them in a different environment where maybe they're used to closing 4 or 5 deals a week, and then you put them into an environment which is like, two a quarter, and suddenly they're terrible. Or they might have had a big team around them with marketing being produced for them, leads being generated. They're really good at demos and close. And then suddenly in your environment, they're terrible because you're asking them to do more of the like going outbound and generating opportunities in like an enterprise account, most wanted account type list. So, or it's just, there's no compatibility with the coaching environment and no compatibility with the sales leader. So this whole principle around good and bad, in your experience, how much of that is finding the right fit for the stage of business versus there are just these overall things that make a salesperson good or bad?
Yeah, that's an astute observation, Richard. I think that it's both. And to your point, like stage fit, previous sales cycle is probably the best proxy for knowing if someone's going to be successful. Industry expertise is actually the easiest thing to teach in my experience. Sales acumen is the hardest to teach. So I've seen middle market and enterprise go to SMB and vice versa. I have seen industry expertise, someone who sells to lawyers only, now go sell to retail workers. I've seen security salespeople learn to sell with pest control door-to-door reps, right? Like you can see that work. The inherent attributes are the hard part to train. The other thing though that's interesting is I have seen the exact same rep multiple times in multiple companies be unsuccessful. So I wouldn't say bad. I should have rephrased that, but unsuccessful in one company and go to another company with better PMF or a persona that better fits their personality, and they crush it.
Yeah.
I've seen someone who's maybe more pushy do really well selling to automotive dealerships, but really struggle selling to HR leaders.
Yeah.
I've seen someone who's highly intelligent, has a really big vocabulary, but struggles to speak simply, do really well with technical buyers, but really struggle with local business owners, right? So it's kind of the propensity of the person, and in addition to the things you shared. Yeah, product market fit is the other one. I've seen reps who are fine at one company, crush it, and be 150% of quota every single quarter or month because the product market fit is better at another company.
Yeah. Which
is actually another assumption people make, but anyhow.
I love it.
Yeah.
And this is why hiring's difficult. It's not just a case of going, I'm going to go and pick the 120% rep from this thing, or this rep was at 50%. There's no way I'm going to hire them. There's loads more to it. And whilst I really strongly believe that you have to get the right environment for certain reps, because their history doesn't always tell you what they're going to be like in your company. At early stage, you really can't afford to get it wrong. And there are a load of salespeople, I would say the majority, that aren't the best in the world. And they're okay at their job and they can kind of get by. They're more sort of like, they can deal with demand and convert it. But the ones who could create opportunity, help you build playbooks, win new customers and get them excited and then build that loyalty, they're very, very rare and they're very special. And if you can find them, and it's probably the top 5% of the talent pool, then you need to be able to create the right environment. So I love that we're talking about this topic. What was the next assumption in your mind?
Yeah. So actually, it was about product market fit, which actually relates to what you just said and the environment. Okay. So it's interesting. What you're talking about is that there's that 1 in 20 rep that can figure it out on their own. I actually posted about this on LinkedIn last week.
Okay.
But like the ability to figure things out and build and navigate ambiguity is something that's very, very rare for someone to do successfully. But product market fit, I think an additional indicator to like the traditional pundits out there that talk about this subject is that if you're average or not mediocre, but like I like to call them key contributors, your key contributing reps can hit quota with a playbook and good environment, that means that you have probably some decent product market fit. If they're able to meet a financially justifiable quota with a good CAC payback, you're in a good spot with product market fit. But product market fit is never permanent. It's always changing. It has a half-life. And a lot of founders will assume, hey, we have product market fit, while forgetting to consider competitive alternatives or temporary price arbitrage in charging more than they should, or, like there's that greed that sets in when you're the first mover in a market.
Yeah.
That gives you the illusion of product market fit and domination, when in reality you have 1% of the market. You have a couple reps that are hitting, you know what I mean? Like there's some false positives there. Sure. The same goes with like NRR growth. I had a friend who was a head of sales at a company. They had strong NRR. They had landed an enterprise customer worth over $1 million. They hired 4 reps because the vision of their product was tremendous. They had an exit plan already. The founders had good connection to the potential acquiring company. They hired 4 reps. They built a lot of pipeline. None of it closed for a year. Everyone left the company, including the head of sales. And again, there's so many assumptions baked into that. Like, oh, we had a customer. They loved us. They're a huge brand. They're retaining. They're actually growing with us, right? Like those early signals, we have happy years as founders sometimes, I think, where we're toxic positivity or delusional optimism is what I've heard it called. Sure. You need that. But again, sometimes the assumptions are too high on NRR, on product market fit, on healthy financial metrics, all those things. Because growth is a blinding but useful metric for a lot of them. Because growth is what we've raised on, and we're still trying kind of detoxing from growth only mindset in the 2021 days. So anyway, those are some others that I've seen.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Everyone who's listening to this will be able to relate to that. 2021, everyone thought they had market. And then something went, oh no, the market's terrible and everything's broken and the world's changed. Like, well, actually, it was a massive false positive for everyone. And even the most mediocre salespeople were doing pretty well in that environment. And a lot of those have been weeded out. It's just the way it goes. So I really like what you've said there. And I think that I'm really curious about this. So it's a balancing act, because you don't want to be in a situation as a founder where you've missed an opportunity to grow and taken advantage. But then you also don't want to stack so high that you end up having to right size because you got it wrong. Like, how on earth can people think about getting that balance right to invest without killing themselves?
Yeah. And when you say invest, you mean in regards to headcount and like doubling down on go-to-market investment?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Basically, putting the right resources in place to be able to deliver that next stage of growth.
Excellent question. So the healthiest metric I've seen, and I like to call them humility metrics, right, are, do you have a good CAC payback on your current go-to-market, which for those that don't know, CAC, cost of acquiring a customer, that's all your sales and marketing spend, which includes leadership. It includes marketing efforts, trade shows, ad spend, all that stuff. If you have CAC payback that is around or less than 12 months, you're probably in a motion that is repeatable enough that you should invest in it. If you're north of that and you're at 18 months, but you do see it declining, you can probably make a good assumption of when that will be at a healthy range of 12 months. Gross margin matters in that, and NRR is something else that matters too. But CAC payback is a humbling metric for a lot of people. The second piece of that, though, is you can have good CAC payback, but not have true repeatability in your motion. So I see this with Y Combinator companies all the time. They launch, they do the PR, release, and all of their batchmates come in via inbound, and they think, oh man, like everyone loves our product. Like there's so much demand in the market. Everyone's, look at the number of inbounds we have. We're overwhelmed. And 5 batchmates buy. They get, 25 to 250K in revenue from that launch. But you can't repeatably do a PR press release with your batchmates from Y Combinator over and over again.
Yeah.
Or you hire that rep, that has a Rolodex, and they hire a few people, or you get lucky and you hire your first enterprise or sell your first enterprise client and they don't work out. So repeatability is selling, in my definition that I've learned, and I don't recall the source, so forgive me for whoever wrote this, but it's the same persona, the same use case, and the same channel in motion with a large enough market behind it. So if you've sold a couple and they've been from disparate places and different use cases, they're all custom, you probably don't have product market fit, and you probably don't have repeatability. So if you have both CAC payback that's healthy and you have some repeatability, some ingredients that you could do again, then that's at the point where I would be confident telling them to invest if they had the cash to invest, and depending on their growth goals, the land grab dynamics of the market. But without those, you're investing in a unprofitable motion that is assumed to be successful. And that has, I've seen it by many companies in the butt. So humility metrics, payback, repeatability, gross margin, NRR.
Love it. I'm sure that will be a standalone clip. And it's not just if you get those things wrong, then you're talking about investor money and they're making expectations with LPs. You're talking about bringing people in who you're giving these targets to, who have their commission and their compensation linked to achieving those goals. It doesn't take long for the reality of missing those things to really affect human beings. And when that starts to happen, that can be disastrous. So I'm sure this is hitting home for people. Let's talk about those different personas. So when all these things are going wrong, you've got these assumptions happening, who are the people inside this environment and this ecosystem who are feeling the pain?
So, and I can speak about this because I've experienced these things. I've made these mistakes or seen these mistakes made or heard about them firsthand many times. So obviously your sales team feels it. Usually if there's a lack of product market fit, or there's, again, not healthy CAC payback, or you haven't found repeatability, then your sellers are likely not going to be hitting their on-target earnings that they're hoping to take care of their families with or their loved ones. They're not hitting quota. Usually you'll see whiplash from sales leaders, because when things aren't working as they are expected or forecasted, and I've made this mistake, it's like, great, well, let's try this. I've seen this work in another company that's very similar from the research that I've done. And you try it and you change, it doesn't work fast enough because here's forecast and we have to hit forecast. It's above what we're at right now. So we try something else. And the team feels whiplash a lot of times in trying to find something that will work. When in reality, there's a baseline assumption that, maybe they're just not that into you, right? With product market fit, or with the way you're messaging things, or who you're trying to sell to. So that's one. On the CS side, I've seen it where, CS is playing the retention rat race. They're trying to make customers fit that don't naturally fit the use case. And there's a ton of customization and renegotiation or reselling on the value, because the product isn't built to a specific persona that is specifically and repeatably findable. Investors, they tend to, maybe don't have confidence in the founders as much because they've missed expectations for forecasts that they've submitted. And founders should be flexible in understanding that in the early days. But once you hold them to a forecast, you should expect to reforecast every quarter at a minimum, if not more often. If you're truly a mature business and you have good product market fit, you'll hit forecast. But there's a lot of assumptions built into forecasts too, like how much will our close rate improve, or at what rate is churn going to increase if we experiment with a new vertical, those types of things. Okay. Customers, again, a lot of times I think there's not a quality product and sales feedback loop and CS feedback loop on what customers are actually wanting. And so you see that. I have seen, customers tolerate the product because it's the only solution that exists in its category first. Incumbents are creeping in, and the company assumes the LTV of this customer, because they've stayed for 2 years and no one's built that product just yet to replace you, is going to be 8 years or 5 years. And it turns out it's actually 2.5 because that customer, perhaps has been neglected by the company and not heard in what they actually need and actually want to sustainably use and love the product enough to refer it. So You see it all over. And then executives, they're dealing with, I think you can see this sometimes, but other times you see them in a lot of meetings trying to brainstorm and figure things out from a product perspective and roadmap perspective, or from a go-to-market perspective, from a positioning perspective, because what they tried last time didn't work. And again, when you're missing based on assumptions, it just creates more work for everybody. And so I think the healthiest thing you can do is as a founder, when you're tempted to lose your humility and believe that one corner of the business is okay, or it can be on a shelf where we don't have to worry about it, write down what assumptions feed into that belief and ensure it checks out with others who don't have an incentive to agree with you. Because even your executive team, there's still a power dynamic. Most executives have been let go or had a good friend let go or furloughed in the last 5 years. And so everyone has an unspoken objection to protect their job, which means oftentimes agreeing with the CEO. And so, make sure you find those that don't have an incentive to agree with you to check on those assumptions. Anyway, there you go.
I love it. Yeah, it's so true. I've seen businesses that have created like a whole set of mini-me's, and they've rejected anyone else who didn't fit into it. And then they felt the pain of basically creating a place that alienates different opinions, which causes huge ramifications. Often you don't see it until you really start to scale, but then you're like, well, why are we consistently hitting this problem? And it's because everyone's got the same blind spots, or they're too afraid to call it out, or just the culture is that you don't challenge those things. So I think that it can very quickly become like so part of your ingrained DNA. If you get the hiring wrong in these key roles, actually it's really hard to go and fix it, really hard. But if you get it right early on and you invite challenge, I think that also can very, very quickly create a magnet, a bit of a gravity ball for people wanting to join, because finally they get to join a business where they have the impact. And why do people want to join startups? Because it's exciting, it's fun, it's innovative, and you get to have an opinion, have a voice, and see the fruits of your labor in much faster and more fun ways than you do in large scale businesses. So I'm just really curious about that. When you're talking about founders getting a network of people who aren't incentivized to go and say yes to them, and we're also talking about hiring people who aren't afraid to say, hey, we think this thing's wrong. Can you talk us through an example of where you've seen someone do that really well and they've managed to create an environment, it could have been yourself, where actually if you have an idea, you have an assumption, there's an environment where that thing can go and get checked and give you the truth beyond what you can see?
Excellent question. So I've not been a founder, so I can't say the exact way they should do it. I've seen some things that have worked for me and my team, but I'm going to highlight some of my team members because they're the ones who have really been the heroes of my success. As you know, you hire someone who's smarter than you, it makes you look a lot better. And I've been the benefactor of that many times. The first thing I found is it can be a direct report, but you need to explicitly tell them that you are not their confidant, but you're in their brain trust, and that you expect them and you need them to help you see things that you might be missing. And there's something about those words vulnerably shared with the direct report that both elevates their confidence in their words and their opinions, but also is honest, because even your direct reports, you're all still peers. We're all still humans, and there should be that mutual respect that you are peers. And I've had to learn a lot about that over my career.
Sure.
But I've been lucky enough to have people that have responded well to that, and that's been helpful. I've seen a founder, this company's nuts. They, in 7 months, grew from 0 founder-led sales to 1.5 million in 7 months. Amazing product market fit. They nailed the research, got their pricing right, new category. This person also was a third-time CEO. So to be clear, they had a really good network, but they had lots of investors and friends that had founded other companies and people that had failed beside them in the past that had the guts to tell them when they were wrong. One of them was a coworker, and I believe a fellow executive member for a previous company where they had worked together. And so while I don't believe in always taking the same people with you to every company because you can find new ideas, there is an advantage to having somebody that, again, will tell you when you have broccoli in your teeth and your product market fit probably isn't as good as you think it is, right? So I've seen that. And then the last is that you can actually do it through survey. So I've seen that. Like there's the classic HR survey, but one of the questions that I like to ask, there's a book out there called it's by Russ Laraway. It is When They Win, You Win. Really well-written book. HR leader from Qualtrics. And there's some questions that he asks that are for surveying employees of frontline managers that's really useful, I think, for a company-wide group where, again, an executive to the CEO to their executive direct reports, those kinds of things. And one of the questions that I've liked from that is, to what extent, from a scale of 0 to 10, actually, this isn't from the book, so you have to edit this, sorry. A great question to ask your employees is, to what extent is the executive team in touch to what extent is the executive team in touch with what is really happening in the business on a scale of 0 to 10? That's quite revealing as an executive to know, because you're going to get the most skeptical, bitter employee responding in an anonymous way, in addition to those who are over the moon excited drinking the Kool-Aid. And you'll find out, you can identify who those people are. And so pull them into an office, talk to them, be curious and value and follow up on the advice or the opinions they've given you. And you'll reinforce that. If you think about neuroplasticity in the brain, like the more you do something, the more it becomes a neural pattern in our brains, right? Yeah. And so the more you keep that communication open with those people that will naturally distill as like your uncomfortably kind speakers in the company, the more you can find those people. And they might be frontline, they might be second line, they might be an investor, they might be a friend, might be a customer. In fact, a lot of times the customer is a key one to have there. Someone who has the guts to tell you what's wrong, because they're not invested. They just use your product. They have a great incentive to tell you what's wrong. So those are some ideas that I've seen.
I really like it. And I think that I've seen, these employee surveys. I remember I was part of a business that grew to like 450 people globally, and we started rolling out like anonymous surveys. And I really missed from that, like being in the earlier stage when we were all just on one floor, like 60 people, and everyone knew each other, and you can have those sorts of very open conversations. And it would be like at lunch or at the pub after work, or in like an actual like one-to-one process, or in the company meeting where everyone was in one room and you could exchange those thoughts. So what I've seen personally from my experience, it'd be good to hear yours, is actually if you can build an environment where you make it safe for people to challenge you, you make it known that you are experimenting, like this is testing hypothesis, and the success or failure is that we either get it right or we learn something. It's not failure as seen as the enemy. I've also seen businesses where the culture was, if you lose a customer, you're in the boardroom doing a post-mortem as to why you lost that customer, rather than any kind of inspection around, was that customer actually the right customer for us to go and work on? In the customer's mind, was it only ever going to be a short-term engagement for a specific need, or was there actually like long-term business value there? Did we get that across in the right way, or was it just never going to become true? So what's your view on, like, obviously it's utopian to be able to do that with everyone, but doing it in person versus the anonymity, or is there benefit to the anonymity that the in-person stuff will never be able to reach?
Yeah, great question. And you probably have more insight to this than I do. I've seen both work. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. What I do know is that there is a feedback loop that you can architect in a company that, regardless if you do anonymous or in person, you can triangulate the truth through other sources too, right? So postmortems for lost customers or closed lost deals are a great example. The data from call recording software like Gong or Chorus or Fathom or whatever it might be, in addition to the CS person's perspective, the sales perspective, the sales manager's perspective, the notes, and then the customer's perspective, because there's process out there and software to do interviews with customers that have left. You can triangulate it either way. So I don't know if I have a strong opinion. I think if you're in person's always more genuine.
Yeah.
But I think it starts with anonymous surveys, sending, again, to your point, those signals of safety to your team when they do express concern or a question, and then slowly investing in a way that keeps a pulse with each department or each key cultural cornerstone of your company to ensure that you're getting the truth from them. And they may sugarcoat it. They probably will sugarcoat it. They have an incentive to. But you'll get closer to the truth.
Yeah.
With each conversation. And I don't think it's tough for a CEO to block off 30 minutes up to 100 employees to talk with 1 to 2 a month. And
exactly, for sure. You're not going to do anonymous surveys every quarter, are you? It might just be like once every year or even longer. So maybe the advice is just test different things. You can never be too close to the truth. And certainly on the customer side too, I think that one thing that the business that I was at, and we saw this amazing growth up to this, being this global business, is we had probably one of the industry's best customer satisfaction processes. And I didn't really realize that at the time. It was something that we took a huge amount of pride in. we had an independent team who weren't incentivized around score in any way, interviewing customers and asking them, what do you care about? Not against this criteria, how do you score us? What do you care about? And then how would you score us? Satisfied, above expectations, exceptional, below expectations, red flag. And then we would publicize those scores, and people that did really well, we had like wow awards where the best customer feedback was noted, but red flags were in the board meeting. And so we dealt with customer feedback in a really fast way. So I think they've been really super close to the reality of how customers perceive you. If you then really treat that as strategically really important and maybe incentivize people around the excellence side of it, can actually create a whole culture where your business is trying to wow customers. And if you can combine that with we're experimenting, it's safe to fail, failure is just learning, we trust you, if something breaks, it's the process, not the person, that's like this incredible culture to create that I would certainly want to work in.
I love that you shared that. It reminded me of a, not related to customers, but of a company. So at Podium, one of their traditions, I love that you still do, is the end of all hands, they do wins, fails, and shout outs. Wins are obvious. Everyone wants to talk about wins and shout at other people, right? But then there's the fail part. And that's translated down to a lot of their sales teams where you go to a forecast meeting. It's not, hey, I'm going to hit this and yeah, don't ask me questions. Like, I'm okay. It's like, hey, I'm actually, at least I've seen it with some of the teams. I couldn't speak for all the teams, but the teams I was able to be a part of, I think we did a good job. And I saw great teammates set examples of, hey, I'm struggling with this deal, guys. I don't know where to go. I've tried multi-threading. I've been shut down. Help me. What advice do you have? And it just created this like vulnerable, interdependent culture that embraced failure and tolerated it and realized that it was actually the path to strength. Wasn't ignoring the weakness. It was embracing it. And I think we can all, I know I can learn a lot from that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that you guys did that with customers. It's a brilliant idea.
It's a good idea, right? And I think it all came, I think it comes from what made me really like resonate with this idea is the John C. Maxwell book, Win or Learn. There is no such thing as failure because you're going to be failing all the time. True failure is just quitting. So as long as you're moving forward, then people just can't fail. And I like that culture. We've talked about now, like your example from Podium, my example from EIMS. What does good look like? So if we talk about how can businesses start to move into that right way? So maybe you can pick whichever way you want to do this. I don't really mind. It could be that we talk about a process that you would go and plug into businesses. Because when I saw your playbook, I was just absolutely wowed. Or it could be about like just some golden rules to create the utopia. What can people do to start to move in the right direction?
Great question. And I have some solutions. I wouldn't propose that they are the only solution. There's 1,000 ways to build a company. But from the lenses that I've seen different businesses operate, there's a few patterns that are consistent. One is that there are 3 phases of basically stages of growth. There's different frameworks out there. Garrett Justice has one. Robert Kaminsky has one. I'll rephrase it a little bit, but basically there's phase 1, which is, and the exercise here is to diagnose where you are actually at in the journey. So there's like product market fit, go to market fit, all that stuff, right? But if you think a little bit more broadly, there's really trying to find repeatability, which means you have a good product, good CAC, good use case, same persona that we talked about before. The second phase is investing in that repeatability. So once you know you have it, or you have a high degree of confidence you have it, for not, again, just the top 1% performers that you can't find all the time, you can only find a few usually, but for the middle of the row, middle of standard deviation reps, if you can get them to repeatably find success and you can invest in that and it continues to work, you are in phase 2, which is winning your niche or investing in repeatability. That's phase 2. You get to the point where there are eventually diminishing returns. You can't hit growth goals with investing in that repeatability, or the market penetration is getting such that you're not seeing as much results as you could have. So that's when you build new repeatability. One thought leader calls this expand to grow. Another is growth to moat. And the idea there in phase 3 is that you're building, basically like you're selling the same product to new people, new personas, or you're selling new products to the same persona. And you can, niche down or niche, not niche down. You can go more narrow with the same persona and really understand and own that customer base, or you can go broader and find new customer bases that have the same problems. Sometimes you can do both. The key is to not focus too wide, because the key is that a lot of founders think they're in phase 3 when they're actually in phase 1. Phase 2 is a long tail, and these aren't sequential. You might have 2 different teams selling 2 different products, and team 2 is in phase 2 where they're investing in repeatability and they're humming, but team 1 is trying to find repeatability still because they're selling a different product or whatever it may be. And so keeping a pulse and diagnosing where you are at, I would say quarterly as a company, by product and by team, that is a useful lens to think through that maturity. And when you get to the point where, again, phase 2 may not be, founders think that, 80% market penetration is good, but a lot of times it's like 20 before you start hitting diminishing marginal returns. That's when you start thinking about phase 3. So I would say that's step 1, is what phase of growth are you actually in? A second is that feedback loop process that we talked about. Because again, like the only way to architect against poor assumptions is to keep a constant flow of information that could tell you you're wrong and could send us, right? If your business was an electrical circuit, you would see the light bulb turn off in a bedroom in your house, so to speak, right? Because like something broke there. And so you have to build infrastructure, process, surveys, feedback loops, and observability dashboards to know what metrics are dropping. Did our sales cycle just drop magically? In a particular team, did our close rate all of a sudden jump a little bit? Like what's happening and why? It never stops. So that's the second piece, is like the feedback loop for keeping a pulse on what's happening in the business. And then I would say if there's a third step, it would be not just thinking about your house or your electrical system of your house, to use that reference. It's to compare those numbers and those metrics to healthy benchmarks. And investors, advisors, and thought leaders that are sound can give you what those are. What is healthy CAC payback? What is a quality quota attainment percentage? What should SDRs be paid? How should quota be measured? Are they measured on demos held? Or are they measured on deals created, ARR? Are we invested in too many channels or just right? Like there's so many questions, and keeping a pulse outside of your system as to how well your system is operating is also changing, because a couple of years ago, LTV to CAC was the way to measure in early stage. And it was totally wrong. In my opinion, CAC payback was a much better metric. And that's what's more common now in early stage. So keeping a pulse externally of what healthy looks like, keeping a pulse of what's happening in your system, and then labeling or thinking through what phase of growth you're in, I found are useful for checking those assumptions. And again, write them down, put them in a document, and gut check them with people that don't have an incentive to tell you what you want to hear. And you will probably keep a healthy view of where your business is at.
As you're telling me all of this, I'm imagining founders listening to this and being like, all sounds great, but goodness knows if I have the time to go and do those things. Or certainly like, once I start getting answers to those questions, will they be the right answers? Will my question be accurate enough? Will I ask the right follow-up questions? If it's not their area of expertise or passions, they don't have that operational architect systems type mindset, or the people mindset around how do we do that in a way that motivates people and drives the right behaviors and helps people to develop and see a bigger picture. I imagine it's really hard. So how do you help businesses? So let's say that a founder was listening to this and they're going, right, I'd love to be able to do some of that stuff, but like, where do we start? How would you practically start understanding if you could help someone?
Yeah, I think the fastest and usually the most affordable way is not DIY. As we've learned from every Pinterest board ever, sometimes it's getting someone that's done it before to mentor you through it. And so I believe that a go-to-market advisor, whether they have a marketing background, they're a former CRO, VP of sales, or an advisor, is really useful because they've seen a breadth of use cases. Every playbook is different for every company. And so I found that that's the best first step, is to find an advisor. Not a plug for myself, just generally speaking, I've never seen a founder, unless the advisor is a pure charlatan, regret that decision, because they have a much clearer objective view, a subject matter expert that can help them know where to start, what questions to ask, and which things to ignore. Because you can't keep a pulse on every part of the business. You're not going to have perfect metrics for what happened on every phone call with every SDR, but you are going to have a metric of what call to set looks like and set demo to close. Yeah. And one of those might be further from a metric, a comp metric than it should be, and they can help. So I think that's the best and simplest way to start, and they can guide you through it. There's great advisors out there. I'm not the most experienced out there. I'm one of many, but there are dozens and dozens, probably hundreds, that are great I know of several dozen that are really, really good and strong. And so happy to provide a referral for anybody or provide advice where I can. Most will do a free consultation for an hour just to get a feel for your business. And that's another really good way to get a pulse on if your instincts are right about which problems you should chase and what type of advisor or sales leader, because sometimes it's a full-time resource, you should hire to diagnose and fix those problems.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Understood. I think you're definitely underselling yourself there. But I understand. There's a lot, right? There's a lot. I think it's about fit, right? Again, like, in my world, there's 27,000 tech recruiters in the UK and 25,000 in the US. So it's like, how on earth do we differentiate? And what I've realized is, for me, it's about really being clear on that we help tech businesses, early stage, find entrepreneurial sales leaders and sellers. And we understand these people because I was one. We've got a podcast that talks to people like you. We really care. This is like our favorite thing in the world to talk about the entrepreneurial space. So what's your sweet spot customer? So let's say that you've got, you would love to speak to someone because it's exactly the type of stage or symptoms or create or context. What is that ideal where you would be one of the people that they should consider having a conversation with?
I think you can't go, well, said simply, I love local businesses. I think there's something that is about the backbone of the world that is someone owning a shop and running a business. And so I would say that local business focus is something that I've done a lot of work in vertical SaaS. Early stage definitely is where I'm not your guy for late stage growth. Can provide advice and references to others, but early stage, founder led to 20-ish reps is a great spot to be. Vertical SaaS, SMB to middle market is more my jam, but particularly those that have done well through inbound, outbound, or events. A PLG motion can be the right thing for a local business or a vertical SaaS company, but that's a slightly different playbook. I have some experience there, but am not the most experienced in that regard. So my jam, vertical SaaS, local business, and early stage founders and first-time sales leaders. Love working with them.
We've talked a lot and we've covered a lot of ground. So I think one idea maybe we should talk about doing afterwards, but I'll tell everyone about it now because it will hold me accountable, is we should probably produce a guide so that we can give people here are the foundations of what we talked about. Maybe we do an article, maybe we do a guide, but we'll give something demonstrable that they can click on afterwards. So if it's not already in the show notes, it will be there soon. You up for helping me to do that?
Yeah, happy to share.
Okay, beautiful. But let's talk about a story. I think stories make things real for people. So could you give us some tales of how all the things that you've just been talking about have actually played out in reality?
Yeah. This is one I've used with a few companies that, again, have requested advice and have worked with. Tale of two companies. And these are real companies. So company one, and they're both through the time frame, by the way, of seed to Series B. Okay. And some of the things that they did and cracks that they are still dealing with, both of them. Company A, they had phenomenal product market fit naturally, first mover in an industry, did really, really well, grew quickly, all the publications, all the fanfare, the normal raises at the right times, good valuations, the fun perks, all those kinds of things. Company A did really, really well. They got away with some struggles as it related to culture and the feedback loop. And that debt always comes due. The assumption that product market fit was good for all use cases or for all products with all personas, and that every team should be treated the same as though they're in the same phase of growth. Those company A struggled a lot to scale all of their teams equally. And as a result, there was forecasts that were missed. They couldn't make it up with other products or other teams as much as they would have liked. And there was a flatlining growth for some time, particularly with certain teams that again, there wasn't a strong feedback loop and assumptions weren't checked. Assumptions were solid and actually told to the team, this is what you have to do. This is truth. We have a good product. You should be able to sell it. You should be able to hit your number. It's just a matter of belief and hard work, right? An element of gaslighting, you could say, with company A. And again, anonymous information here, may or may not be companies I've worked for or heard of. Company B, strong product market fit, good fundraises, good growth, but a different humility at the leadership level where the CEO wasn't as much in the spotlight by nature of who he was beloved by his team, Their growth rate wasn't quite as fast, but was still very good. In fact, this company ended up having a very successful exit with a B later on. CEO found a way to hire executives that would tell him when he was wrong and would hire for diversity of thought and challenge the status quo and create a cycle of internal disruption. They found out they didn't have a strong product market fit with certain use cases. They had to adjust pricing. They had to adjust their go-to-market motions. They had to redo a lot of things. But in that rebuilding and in that remodeling of their company and their business, they've had a longer trajectory of success than company A did. And again, my message or my plea to any founder is don't lose your humility. We all can learn about this in personal life as well, right? But there's something about having people close to you that have the guts to tell you when you have broccoli in your teeth and when something's not great or could be improved in an uncomfortably kind way. And I think the way that those two companies approached that feedback loop or sought out that feedback dramatically impacted the results that they had in the long run. Yeah. Both are still around. Both are okay. But one is still dealing with a lot of those cracks. The other is dealing with other problems because there's always problems to fix. But a much different long-term outcome because of what happened in those early days, and like childhood trauma or like a debt that you incur in your college credit card that never goes away and you have to try and constantly pay it away. Debts always come due. And that includes in how you architect your company, your culture, and the assumptions that you build your company around. So yeah, keep yourself in check. Don't lose your humility. I'm not saying that as a person who has perfect humility. I've got a lot to learn. But it's a really useful process for building a sustainable and sustainable and strong business in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Lovely. Well said. And I do believe that anyone that's listening to this has a growth mindset and is looking to move their business forward. So they're the perfect candidate to hear that message. So look, Joseph, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. We'll have to have you on again soon if you're up for it.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Learned a lot from you as always. So thanks for that.
Good man. Thank you so much, Joseph. And everyone else, we'll see you on the next pod. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this conversation, we've got a newsletter called Growth Magnet on LinkedIn, where we take the best insights from all of these episodes and turn them into bite-sized format for you to enjoy.